The audio version of my book, Resilience in the Face of Multiple Sclerosis, is now available. And today I have a discussion and interview of the narrator of the audiobook, Daniel Pagoni. This book is about overcoming adversity in the face of multiple sclerosis. I interview 5 people with MS and learn about their lives. For instance, one of the protagonists, Miguel Hernandez, develops low vision due to MS. He loses his job, he has to drop out of school, and he rebuilds his life from nothing. And it's very interesting to see how people from different walks of life with different backgrounds show resilience in completely different ways. And in the intervening chapters, I talk about the science and psychology of resilience, and I also share my own experiences. The ebook version is free on Amazon, and the paperback is priced to generate $0 royalty from me if you buy it on Amazon.com. I can't control the price on Amazon.uk, for instance, and other websites. Of course, there are royalties if you buy the audiobook, but some people requested it, so I really wanted to make it. And here is the narrator, Daniel Pagoni. Thank you for taking the time today, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to you too, Brandon,
I am
and
wearing a
everybody out
splash
there.
of green, so you can't pinch
Yeah.
me even through Zoom. Multiple sclerosis is a weird topic, probably not something you'd normally narrate. What got you interested in multiple sclerosis in the first place?
It is multiple sclerosis has affected my family, mainly my wife. She's been diagnosed while we were under the COVID. And from there, we've been trying to learn about it as much as possible. That's what got me originally interested. What got me interested in this particular book and to do the actual audition for the book was it was like, oh, I wonder where he's going with the resilience part. And then the audition was a part of the book that hit me very hard. It was very strong, like a lot of the stories within this book, where just the human nature of it came out, and I really hope to make the human nature come out in the book, and to allow for people to understand a little bit more, not only what the disease is, but how these powerful people and the people who support them go through life and not only go through it, but kind of thrive, where the resilience comes in. So that was kind of how I got into it from there.
So, obviously your wife has MS. I'm sure you've done a lot of research and from personal experience know a lot about the disease. But what did you think about MS prior to that? Prior to having any personal experiences, what were your general thoughts about MS?
I did have people who I've worked with in the past with MS. I did learn, there are certain challenges that you wouldn't see normally in some, and then others were quite visible, where it was affecting them. So I always looked at it as more of just kind of a wild card or variable as to how it affects people. And some people I never even had a clue. But they mentioned it to me, and it was like, oh, I always thought. And then as you learn more and see more, it's becoming a little bit more visible in, like, I mean, if you look at People magazine, probably within the past, 3 years, very large named people have come down with the disease and talked to it. The reason I know that is because we get people at the house. That's kind of those things. But really, the thing that brought it home the most was when I would go and attend with my wife, which I still do, her meetings. I shouldn't say meetings, her doctor's appointments. The difference in the people who are in the room, and just how that works, and how it's not a one size fits all disease. People have so many different things. It's so interesting, and everybody's dealing with it in a different way. And that, I think, is probably what the book um, brings out, is that it's different, but it's still powerful.
But you work with people who lived with MS and were still working and being productive. And so, maybe you've had a more positive sense of the disease than a lot of people. Some people
True.
think everyone with MS is profoundly disabled.
And that's true, and that's probably the thing that's probably the most surprising about it. Um, and in our in the book, there are some who are it's very visible from your description that their disease is affecting them outwardly, and then there are some where it's very internal, and you wouldn't know it if they wouldn't express it. Um, the difference between the two doctors in the book is a great example of that difference, where one has even speech and other things and they've adapted, and the other can just appear. If they don't tell somebody, they might not know. Some of their patients don't know unless she tells them.
Yeah, one of the doctors you're referring to is Dr. Emily Spitz, who was actually a neurology resident when I first became an attending physician. So I was actually her mentor in addition to being her doctor for a brief period. She was actually seen primarily by one of our mentors. But if you saw her, you wouldn't know she has multiple sclerosis. But she had a lot of problems related to MS that wouldn't be so obvious. And she was really a fighter. She had the type of personality that I think people would stereotypically associate with resilience. She was very type A, very intense. But the other doctor, who's Dr. James Bott, who had much more significant disability, a lot of walking problems, walking with a walker, even his speech was abnormal, he was still able to work as a psychiatrist. And he had almost the opposite personality. He was very type B, very laid back, but a fighter sort of in his own way. And it's really interesting to see how different people battle MS and different challenges in a different way.
Right. And I totally think that's probably the best part about reading it and narrating it. It was that just difference in that power. It's just powerful. It just is. It affects you in many, it affected me in many ways. And not just because I've had experience with it personally. I think it would be something that anybody who is looking into what really does resilience mean, this book covers it. I mean, I can completely say that. It covers what does it mean? How do you develop that power? Not only as the book goes into, the psychological side of it, there's research behind it. I mean, it is deep into what resilience is and how these people fit it.
Yeah, now you used to work for the VA and benefits, so you have a lot more experience than the average person dealing with disabilities. What are your experiences through your former profession, I guess?
So specifically to MS in my former position, um, other than working with people, I never had much with the MS side. Um, but I did purchase items for those people to continue on. Things like braces, specifically for walking walkers, canes, things like that, for those kinds of patients. Um, but what I did see in the employees that I worked with was they had very good, most of the people who work in the VA are like myself, a veteran. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. Not that it's a bad thing when I use the word beast. It is literally a support for all of us veterans, and they treat us very well. And the doctors who work with the MS patients are top notch according to the people I know. And they always said that they would always, when they had their meetings, or I shouldn't say meetings, I should quit saying meetings, appointments, when they have their appointments, they always were taken care of. They always came back feeling better, like there's something coming up that's going to help, or we're trying this new medication. But if they wouldn't have told me, other than one or two of the people I've worked with over the many years in the government, um, you probably wouldn't know. They'd be more of the Emily Spitz type than the Dr. Bot type. And just in general, one was more Dr. Bot, but after a while, it's like there's something powerful in everyone, and everyone has their own issues that they're dealing with. But to watch and learn about how people do resilience and to be there with them when they do is beautiful. It helps everyone understand that even though they got I shouldn't say kind of, they got a bad deal with the diagnosis, but knowing the diagnosis and their ability to adjust to that diagnosis makes it so people don't even recognize um, it's a problem. You just wouldn't know. They're just a colleague. Sometimes they have more appointments than I did. That was basically the difference. Um,
So the five people, their stories are different, the people are different, their personalities are different. Is there any one person you connected with personally?
wow, it's kind of a combination. It truly is a combination, right? Dr. Spitz, because I always like to think of myself as a type A, even though I'm probably not. Just that I suffer in silence a lot, and I know she did too. Um, there's that lovely story about her. And when people hear the book, um, it's really a very interesting story with her and her husband when she was not able to get out of a room. I'll leave it at that. Um, that would be me. Sandra Orozco, just simply because of how strong her heart is, and what I mean is her feelings. She really um, was able to give you her heart all the way, and what her heart was like at the beginning of her life and where she came to. Strong and powerful. Barbara Richardson, there's another one. Miguel and his problems with drugs and addiction. That was very powerful. That's something else that I think a lot of families have um, things with that they can find. Not only just the MS side, like I talked about before, but like reality. This is life. It's not just one thing. They're resilient through multiple things. And those are the ones that I probably sit with the most.
Now, in the other chapters, not about the people with MS, I give a lot of different pieces of advice. I talk about a lot of studies and schools of psychology. And, my opinion would be there's no one thing that's going to work for everyone, and there are different things that might appeal to different people. Do you think there is any advice that I give that is very practical and actionable that you think would work for you or other people?
So I cannot wait um, for people to hear the Ho'oponopono. I thought that was chapter 7, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken now. But that chapter, it really kind of blew my mind as to how just personal and peaceful that could be, and how you could take that and work that into your program of just living. That one hit me very strong. Psychological one, where another Dr. Bieber brought forth, actually two, I think, actually brought forth a bunch of information on the psychological aspects of it and how um, you look at resilience that way. Um, I thought that was fascinating.
Ho'oponopono
And
is very interesting. I didn't know
yeah,
anything about it before I started researching the book. It's a Hawaiian philosophy about sort of, looking upon the self and looking your philosophy to the world. And there's certain mantras and rituals. And it's very interesting. I interview like a world expert in Ho'oponopono, Mabel Katz, who's very well known. And it's something I didn't know a lot about or didn't think about. But, I think it could be very practical and helpful to some people.
yeah, completely agree. And that actually, I've been able to take some of that um, and just be able to go, okay, let's work this a little different. It's not that it's anything uber shocking or anything like that, but it's just such a nice, calm way to look at life. Just really nice. I was fascinated by it, honestly. It just to see that after it was such an interesting way to just throw that in there. Not like it's out of shock. It's just it's there and it's like this nice. I guess the best way to put it is like a almost a cleanse, if you will, where there's information and things, and then here's something that can help you. And then it moves. through the rest of the book with more things that can help you. So it was just fascinating and lovely. I loved all of it.
One thing that appealed to me personally is the work by Dr. Martin Seligman, who's considered the father of positive psychology. And it's the idea that the field of psychology kind of focuses on the negative, like anxiety and depression. But what about how can an average person live a greater life? And he does a lot of research on happiness, and he kind of describes their different forms of happiness. And one form would be kind of simple hedonic pleasure, like watching a comedy show or eating delicious food. And he said this is a real form of pleasure. It really does give people happiness, but it's very fleeting. It doesn't last a long time, and people become habituated to it. And so it's not as important as people think in terms of long term happiness. So he talks about other forms of happiness. One is the idea of engagement, which is the idea of being engrossed in an activity, something that takes up your time. So for Sandra Roscoe in the book, she's very interested in politics. Even though she can't do a lot of things because of her physical limitations, she goes to city council meetings, she's talking to people, she's trying to influence things and make things better in her community. And Barbara Richardson, she is very disabled, really only has use of one arm, is very limited, but she's mentally sharp. She speaks English and Spanish very well. And so she's teaching English to people in her church who need to learn it in order to get a job in the United States, for instance. And that's very meaningful to her. And then the last thing is meaning, having a purpose in life, doing something that is valuable to the community as a whole. And so I find that to be very valuable to think not how can I seek like the next hedonic pleasure, but what is my purpose in life and what do I need to do to keep myself busy?
That's one of the interesting things about how I got into voiceover, and to doing audiobooks was my wife came to me and said, and this was during COVID, it's like you need to find something else to do than just sit around and watching TV. You have a good voice. Have you thought about doing, I don't know, voiceover or something? She saw something. And so I went on YouTube, looked at it, and said, well, what the heck? Buy a microphone off Amazon and go into my daughter's closet with all of her stuffed animals and did an audition and got the book. Um, 20 plus books later, it's been so fascinating. And now I have a meaning. Does that make sense? It's one of those things where it's like I have a purpose where I wake up now, and it's not just, oh, I got to go to work, or it was during COVID, so at that time it was not going very many places. Um, and then there is that aspect that I think it is actually that same chapter of Dr. Siegelman, is the aspect of how people with MS isolate even more, or they feel like they isolate more. That was interesting, and that made me go, "Oh, okay." Um, I can see that in my own life and with some of the people that I've worked with as well, where people feel that need to isolate because they don't feel right all the time, and sometimes they don't know why they don't feel as good as they think they should feel, and they isolate more. And that isolation, as talked about in those chapters, is, well, it causes massive depression at the least, um, and other things too. It was also interesting to hear, and it's not a great topic to talk about, but divorce rates and things like that um, after diagnoses. That was shocking all the way across. So, I mean, that's kind of the beautiful thing, and why I talk about the Ho'oponopono chapter so much, is kind of like a cleanse, because there's some deep discussion going on in the book, and that's really nice to have. Is there's positive and negative, but the negative can't be left alone. It needs to be talked about, but there's positive with it, and people who have suffered many things worse than I'll ever suffer, I hope, um, just keep surviving and doing great.
And there are a lot of people that I could have interviewed, some of my other patients who are amazing, and I just didn't because I had limited space in the book. You know, it's already about 300 pages. And there are tons of people who overcome incredible adversities, and many of them, I just couldn't believe it. Like Dr. James Bott, I just assumed he wasn't working because his disabilities are so apparent. And even people who aren't working, often they're doing something else that's very productive and meaningful. Now, I was going to ask you, out of curiosity, how exactly does someone become an audiobook narrator in the first place? Like, what is the step-by-step process of doing that?
So for me, I'm a little bit different than most because I just accidentally just shot on ACX because I saw it on YouTube to do it. Um, Many years ago, it was through publishing houses. Now it's more of a freelance. Anybody can get on ACX or the Amazon Community Exchange. Is it? I can't remember. Communication Exchange is what it stands for. Something I got to remember. It's acx.com. And then open up and start putting samples and doing auditions. Um, that's how it goes. When I started, I was editing my own books, and so editing, like video editing, as you might know, um, you could do an hour finished, and it takes about 3 hours for every hour, just to make sure it's there. So now I hire an editor, and God love him, he deals with a lot of stuff that I could only imagine. As somebody who's hearing impaired, it definitely helps me because I can't hear everything, even if I wanted to. I do a lot of it by sight um, when I do narrate or edit and narrate, and I do edit before it goes to him, but I let him do the real big heavy lifting. I have some systems in place that I can see errors and issues. And so, yeah, that's basically how it goes. On ACX, I auditioned for this one. I auditioned for most of them. I have gotten one because somebody heard a sample of mine. But other than that, that's how it goes. It's very fun to audition. I can tell you that much. It's also fun to read the book. Um, this is not the longest book I've done, but it's pretty close. Um, and it's length is never the problem. It's one of the things where you just want to do so well that sometimes you have paralysis by analysis. Like, oh, I don't know if I said that completely right. Um, but once you get into a flow, it's great. The other thing is I usually do nonfiction mostly. So characters are not big and bold. Nobody's going to believe that I'm uh, a female of Hispanic descent from Southern California. So I mean, I can allude to it, but I'm not going to ever. Nobody would believe it, especially not looking at me, right? Um, so that's one of the things. If you hear somebody who does really strong fiction, both male and female can do both parts, and you would be just amazed. I have a community of people that am with. It's called the VO's Journey Elite Academy. I got with them as soon as after my first book, realizing I have no idea what I'm doing and I needed help, and got along with them. And I've been with them for many years, and that's been helpful. I've also had some coaching from some very powerful people in the audiobook space. And yeah, it's just been fun. And making a closet into a studio has been an absolute riot. Who knew? I mean, if somebody would have said I'd be stuffing, large amounts of foam all over my interior closet in my house so I could have a dead space, um, it's wonderful. There is a downside to that. It gets hot. I can tell you that much. Somebody at 98.6 sitting in a small room with foam all around it with the door closed can get a little warm.
I
So
see.
that's probably the biggest job hazard that I can think of. Maybe I don't know. Maybe the foam would fall down. But that's basically it. What you see over to my right, over here, is a large piece of foam from Home Depot with a moving blanket over the top of it. I put that in, and that takes care of the lower register a little bit more. My voice is low; it's not one of the lowest, but you would hear a lot of resonance coming out of my voice if I were to talk without that there. It's just interesting how many things you learn, and it's like anything when you get used to speaking. Um, the biggest thing is learning to read. I thought I could read ever since I was probably 5. Reading out loud for a very long time is challenging, to say the least. I can only imagine trying to read out loud, some kind of medical book that would, that'd probably put me over the edge. I don't know if I'd be able to do it. Um, but yeah, that's the beauty of this all, is that I have the privilege of reading that book. And my voice will be there for a long time, and that's a blessing.
So I noticed
Yeah.
that you're in Denver, and from your social media, it looks like you're a Denver Nuggets fan. And I know Denver is competing to get that first seed. The Lakers, where I'm in Los Angeles, are in 10th place right now. But would you really want to face the Lakers in the first round?
We in Denver don't know what we're doing. Okay, we won last year. Like, that's our first out of the Denver Nuggets, the long beaten down franchise, right? Now we're somebody. Since we did actually sweep the Lakers last year, I wouldn't mind seeing the Lakers. But if they can get in and they go on a run, any one of the teams in the West are always dangerous. It doesn't matter. I think the Suns and the Thunder are probably the two that I'm probably most worried about.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Daniel. And to check out the book, please see the links in the notes below. Take care.
Thank you, Brandon.